All right. Some friends here were asking me about the multiverse theory. And at first I thought they were talking about the many worlds hypothesis, so I've been running with explaining that. They meant multiverse in a fiction sense, but I'm helping them understand where that fiction is deriving from, which is the many worlds hypothesis. As a hook, it is both more interesting in what it's saying and also not nearly as impactful as people think it is. Essentially, it starts with this double slit experiment. We've got a box and we've got a thing that streams photons at it. This box has two slits in it. Intuition says, well, light's a particle. Light, when you shoot it at a thing, is going to go half of them into this one box and half of them into the other. There should just be two lines in the back of the box. And if you're thinking about it as a wave, like splashing two waves next to each other, they're going to interfere with each other and they are going to produce a pattern on the back of the wall that sort of has like a on and off sort of pattern, both in between and around these two slits. What we see, even when we're streaming individual photons, is that it forms that same interference pattern as if we were doing a full beam of light where all the light can bounce around like particles, or like a bunch of particles at once. But you're just streaming one photon at a time, which means that somehow you've got an interference pattern despite the photon not colliding or interacting with other things. It's acting like a wave even though it's one thing, which is very troubling. And it gets at this question, why is it doing that? Why is it being a funny little guy that isn't behaving like a particle should? And essentially, the conclusion of that is that it is both a wave and a particle at the same time. It only decides how it acts, whether it is being looked at. If someone is, and I'm using looking at very loosely, there's a rigid physics term, or there's a rigid physics way that looking at is defined. It is a form of measuring. I will not get into the details because it is way more in the weeds. But if you look at each photon as it goes through, it's going to act like a particle. And if you were to add up all the looked at photons going through there, you would see it just forms two lines in total. It never goes anywhere funny. But if you stream a shit ton of photons and only look at the end result, even though you're only streaming them one at a time, it ends up forming this interference pattern, as if there were multiple going all at once. And this weird observation thing is ridiculously funny, because it indicates that photons, even as individual objects, are acting probabilistically. It's acting based off of probabilities. And this brought up the very scary question, is our universe not deterministic? If I push over a domino, it will fall. That is a cause and an effect. In a deterministic universe, everything is all chains of cause and effect. That if you know the initial conditions, you can predict, no matter what, you can predict, based off of the initial conditions, the end state of things with absolute certainty. But if the universe is probabilistic, you cannot say that absolutely. There could be a whole host of outcomes that could happen. And this is disconcerting. Even Einstein was not a fan of the universe being probabilistic. He made the famous quote, "God does not play dice," that the universe should be deterministic. He was asserting that there must be more information that we lack. But due to some fancy set theory stuff that even I don't fully get, I'll admit. It's a Bell test if you're looking into the subject on your own. It was shown that there isn't any hidden variables. There's no information about how these photons are acting, really how entangled particles are acting, but I'm just keeping it simple and on the point. There is no extra information. They genuinely just are behaving based off of probability, which is terrifying. It means that the universe is probabilistic. So you start to ask, what does it mean for there to be a future state? What does it mean for there to be a future? Because you could, like, interrogate what is now? What does that look like? And you could describe it as the one thing that it is, how the universe is in all of the little points of information. In a deterministic universe, the future is the same thing, one state that the universe is in. But If the universe is probabilistic, the universe in that future isn't in any one of these states because it isn't a deterministic absolute thing. So it's sort of like the future is in all of those states, and we just haven't gotten there to know which state it'll end up in. But a lot of pop science explainers and science communicators will phrase this as there is all these universes that probabilistically exist. One in which you choose Kellogg's cereal and another where you choose Life cereal for breakfast, and each one is a branching path that could happen. Not really. These sorts of things, at a macro scale, with a human person, they're basically deterministic. They're effectively deterministic for human lifetime scales. But when we're talking about objects that behave probabilistically like this, at those tiny scales, it is a genuine branching path. The cat in the classic Schrodinger's cat example, which is basically just explaining the concept through analogy rather than some realization, the cat is in both of those states. It is in both the dead state and the alive state at once. It is both of them at the same time, but that is because that end result is directly linked to something that is acting probabilistically. In the original example, they use a radioactive particle, which does behave probabilistically in these sorts of scales. But the important thing is that the multiverse is not all of these things all happening at once, any of the possibilities, woo, amazing. It's really, there's basically one outcome, but if you go billions of years out, there's a slight difference in how some larger macro stuff ended up.
Okay, I get
so
you.
basically, the multiverse is a bunch of extremely similar results that are ever so slightly different because of tiny things being slightly different. There is effectively one thing that happens. At the tiny scale, there's a bunch of shit that's all different because it's all acting probabilistically, and the multiverse is supposed to capture all of these potential states that could be from that. But because it is at such a tiny scale, it basically doesn't matter for the macro scale stuff. Physics at the macro scale, at the scales and ways of understanding that we as humans operate on, is effectively solved. All of physics research is just at the ridiculously tiny scale, and at the ridiculously specific and precise scale. We are working at the edges for this shit. It is not like, oh, we don't know what the world operates like. It's basically solved. I think that's end of rant as well. But yeah, check out my YouTube.
Honestly, that's hella cool. And
I think so as well.
Explain me the
See ya.
multiverse.